Today, our explorer is about to do something that millions of people have done across the last 50 years. Mostly at 2 in the morning, probably in their pajamas, with a piece of graph paper beside them that's covered in pencil marks that they'll swear make sense and don't. He's going into a dungeon. Not just any dungeon. This is a fortress cave map in the tradition of some of the strangest, most obsessive game design that ever came out of the home computer era. The kind of map that took weeks to design on paper, that players would spend hours trying to crack, that was passed around on floppy disks and printed in magazines and argued about letters and pages that took 3 weeks to reach the end. Maps like this were games before graphics existed, before a sound card, before you could see anything at all. Let's go. The gate. Every dungeon map has one, and the tradition of starting a player right here, outside, looking in, standing at the threshold before the descent, goes all the way back to 1975, when a programmer named Will Crowther sat down at a PDP-10 mainframe at Bolt, Burneck, and Newman in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and did something no one had quite done before. He wrote a game based on a real cave. Crowther was a programmer, but he was also a spelunker. He and his then-wife Patricia had spent years in the early 1970s exploring the Mammoth Cave system in Kentucky, the longest cave system in the world. Patricia was actually instrumental in connecting the two enormous cave networks in the 1972 expedition. She was small enough to slip through a squeeze too narrow for any of the men on the team. Crowther mapped those caves obsessively. He kept vector maps on a computer. And when he and Patricia divorced, and he was suddenly a single father who wanted something he and his daughters could explore together, he turned those maps into a game. He called it Adventure. The opening line, once you booted it up, you're standing at the end of a road or a small brick building. Around you is a forest. A small stream flows out of the building and down a gully. That building was the gate, and behind it, down through a locked iron grate in the earth, was everything else. The cave in the game was so faithful to the real Mammoth Cave system that, years later, actual cavers who played the game reported being able to navigate the real bedquilt region of Mammoth Cave on their first visit, just from memory of where those passages went in the text adventure. That's the gold standard, a map so real you could use it as a map. Our gate isn't that gate, but every gate sense owes something to it. Don Woods found Crowther's game on a computer at Stanford in 1977. He loved Tolkien, deeply, seriously loved Tolkien, and he asked Crowther's permission to expand it. Crowther said yes. Woods turned a 700-line Fortran hack into something closer to a working engine. He added a scoring system, a player inventory, a pirate who randomly appeared to steal whatever you'd collected, magic words that applied an actual fictional logic, and a troll under a bridge because of course there was a troll. He also added something the original didn't have, a point where losing was permanent. Play long enough without getting out, and the cave would simply claim you. When Adventure arrived at MIT through ARPANET, the precursor to the internet that both Crowther and Woods had connections to, the reaction was, by one account, that the entire computer industry was set back 2 weeks while everyone played it. Nobody worked, they just mapped. Which brings us to our first junction. Look at this. 3 ways to go. This is one of the most deliberate choices in the history of game design. The branch. Not a hallway, not a corridor that leads from A to B. A genuine choice. North, south, or deeper in. Where taking the wrong path doesn't just delay you, it can lose you. The maze of twisty little passages all alike from Colossal Cave Adventure is probably the most famous navigation puzzle in gaming history. Every room was described identically. There were 10 of them, all interconnected in ways that didn't match the direction you walked to get there. You couldn't tell where you were. The game had removed the information you needed to navigate, on purpose, as a whole. The solution, and its beautiful solution, was to drop objects. Leave an axe in one room, food in another, a lantern in a third. Suddenly, the identical passages had landmarks. You were building a map out of your own inventory. Players didn't just play Colossal Cave Adventure. They mapped it. Hand-drawn on graph paper with rooms as circles and passages as lines, dead ends marked with an X. Tracy Kidder described a computer lab in the late 1970s where someone was playing adventure for the first time, and strewn across the desk like party relics were dozens of roughly drawn maps. Dirty Passage, Hall of Mist, Hall of the Mountain King, Complex Junction, Blended Chamber, it's in. That tradition, player as cartographer, predates Dungeons and Dragons. It goes back to wargaming culture, the military map exercise, to the specific pleasure of building your own knowledge of a space piece by piece. Every branching path in every dungeon since then is paying that off. Which way would you go? The thing about dungeon maps in the early home computer era was that they were genuinely scarce resources. You didn't download a walkthrough. There was no game fact. If you were playing a Japanese computer game from 1986 that never got an English release, something in the vein of what you might call the Relics Dark Fortress school of design, those claustrophobic fortress crawlers that stayed locked inside the PC-88 and X68000 market, you were completely on your own. Maybe a friend had played it. Maybe there was a note in a magazine you didn't subscribe to. You mapped it yourself. Every room, every connection, every dead end you fell into before you understood the layout. There's something profound about that. The map you drew wasn't just a tool, it was a record of everything you survived. Let's stop here. This is an armory. Sword racks, locked chests, the specific pleasure of a room that rewards you for finding it. In the early dungeon games, what was in a room was everything. The room descriptions in Colossal Cave, the Golden Room, Y2 Rock, the Hall of the Mountain King, were so evocative that players built entire mental worlds from 6 sentences of all caps text. But here's where it gets interesting. In 1980, Michael Toy and Glenn Wickman, both students at UC Santa Cruz, made a game called Rogue. And they solved the problem of what's in the room by deciding their game itself shouldn't know until you open the door. Rogue and procedural generation. Every dungeon was different. Every run was different. Monsters, treasures, room sizes, connections, all randomly assembled at runtime from a framework of rules. The basic structure was elegant. The screen was divided into 3x3 grid like a tic-tac-toe board, and one room of random size could appear in each cell. Then hallways were drawn to connect them. They used the Curses library, a Unix tool that let programs position characters precisely on the terminal screen, to represent everything in ASCII. Wall were dashes and pipes. Doors were plus signs. The player was the at symbol because, as Toy put it, that's where you're at. That symbol, at, has become one of the most durable icons in gaming. 5 years later, it still means player in countless games. The weapons in a room in Rogue weren't labeled. Potions didn't have names. Everything was unknown until you used it. A scroll might teach you magic or kill you. A ring might grant power or curse your hand so you could never take it off. One player reported equipping a ring of teleportation, thinking they could warp strategically around the dungeon, which it did do, but randomly, without warning, at any moment. And it was cursed so they couldn't remove it. Every step might teleport them somewhere completely different. They described it as the most entertainingly broken playthrough they ever had. That's what's in the rooms, the possibility of anything. Rogue had one other design decision that changed everything. Permadeath. When your character died in Rogue, they were dead. No save states, no continues. Start over from the beginning with nothing. Every choice mattered because every choice was permanent. This was not an accident, it was philosophy. Toy and Wickman wanted every step to carry weight. They wanted the dungeon to feel dangerous in a way that no amount of save scumming could defang. The game spread through college networks across America and eventually bundled into DSD units, meaning it was pre-installed on thousands of university computers. Every computer science student encountered it, it became the rite of passage. One journalist described it as proof that procedural generation could create the illusion of a real world. Done right, randomness doesn't feel random, it feels like fate. Don't look down. Well, look down a little. Look at what's underneath. This kind of underground geography, forest built over a cave system, passages dropping away into dark, specific architectural logic of a place that was both built and grown, drew from literature just as much as it drew from game design. Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, published in 1864, and now fully in the public domain, gave readers vast subterranean worlds full of prehistoric seas, underground storms, and the sense that the earth beneath your feet has no floor. H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mine, 1885, also public domain, adventures into deep places where maps lead to treasure, but the path is genuinely dangerous, and where the wrong turn doesn't just inconvenience you, it kills you. The earliest computer dungeon designers grew up reading these things. They built their underground worlds from the same impulse, the romance of the deep place. The idea that below the surface, the rules are different. Wickman, one of Rogue's creators, said the goal was to make a game that felt like reading a great fantasy novel, except you were writing it in real time with every decision you made. The dungeon was the book. You were offering your own doom or your own triumph. Cross the bridge. The next section is deeper. Here is a detail that almost nobody knows. When Rogue was first shipped with MS-DOS 1.0 on the IBM PC in 1981, neither Toy, Wickman, or Ken Arnold, who helped develop the Curses library it depended on, received any royalties. Not 1 cent. That's how these things work. The game was passed around on the network. Reported it, Microsoft bundled it. The creators' names were in the code, but not the contract. And yet Rogue inspired Moria, which inspired Agban, which inspired NetHack, which, along with Dwarf Fortress, inspired Minecraft. The entire lineage of survival games, of crafting games, of every roguelite with procedurally generated levels played in the last 20 years traces a line back through those twisty paths. One idea, a tic-tac grid of runes, the accent. Sometimes the thing that changes everything doesn't know it's doing it at the time. This section of the forest, these tighter corridors, the layered rooms, the feeling of a place like built defensively downward. This is the aesthetic of the games that never left Japan. In the mid-1980s, Japan had its own thriving computer game ecosystem, largely centered on the PC-88 and the Sharp 8 X68000. These machines had sound chips and graphical capabilities that their American counterparts didn't match for years. And they produced dungeon and fortress crawlers with specific visual styles, meticulous, dark, full of hand-painted art and atmospheric music that the hardware could actually play. Most of these games had no English release. They circulated within Japan, in magazines like Login and Technopolis, reviewed and mapped in publications that never crossed the ocean. Foreign players who somehow acquired copies through import stores, through collector networks, through people who had been stationed in Japan and came home with a stack of discs, played them blind, without manuals, without guides, figuring out the maps the same way you'd figure out Colossal Cave, one wrong turn at a time. That isolation gave those games a particular mystique. They were real dungeons. You went in, you mapped it yourself. You might have no idea what the story was, but you understood the geography eventually, because geography doesn't require translation. A treasure chest is a treasure chest in any language. A locked door is a locked door. The symbol for a trap is usually self-explanatory right after you walk into it. Secret passages. The secret room hidden behind a bookshelf through a wall that looks solid behind a waterfall is one of the oldest tricks in the dungeon designer's toolkit, and comes directly from the tabletop tradition. When Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson created Dungeons & Dragons in 1974, dungeon maps were drawn by the dungeon master on graph paper before the session. Each square on the grid was 10 feet. Rooms had dimensions measured in squares. Doors were marked with D, secret doors with SD. Players who wanted to find secret doors had to tell the DM they were searching the wall. Roll a die. If it came up right, the DM would show them the passage. If not, the wall was just a wall, as far as they knew. The same convention moved directly into video games. In early dungeon crawlers, search for secret passages was a mechanic you had to consciously activate, standing next to a wall and pressing a button. Later games automated it. Still, later games eliminated it entirely and made everything that moved the mystery, but not the room. The secret passage exists because real places have them. Castles had priest holes, hidden rooms where Catholic priests hid during the Reformation. Medieval fortresses had escape routes known only to the garrison. The Tower of London has passages that weren't on any public map for centuries. The designer who puts a secret passage in a dungeon map is doing what Crowther did with Mammoth Cave, taking something real about how places are built and asking whether the player can find it. Our explorer found it. Let's keep moving. This is the room that justifies the whole fortress. Someone built this place. They needed to keep records. They needed to store knowledge. They needed, at some point, a reason to be here beyond monsters and treasure. In the best dungeon design, every room answers the question about the people who built it. The torture chamber implies a regime. The kitchen implies they had to eat. The library implies they were trying to learn something, or preserve something, or hide something in plain sight. This is what separates a dungeon that feels like a real place from one that feels like a series of encounters on a grid. Will Crowther's cave felt real because it was real. The gold room existed. The Y2 rock existed. The bed quilt entrance was an actual steel grate mounted in concrete at the bottom of a 20-foot depression in the contested floor. When cavers who played the game visited Mammoth Cave for the first time, they already knew where to go. They mapped it in a text adventure 20 years earlier. That's the goal of every map. Make a place so real that someone who's never been there can find their way. The books on these shelves don't have titles your explorer can read, but someone wrote them. Someone needed them. That's the history you're walking. By the mid-1980s, dungeon maps had developed their own grammar. Doors were always rectangles bisecting a wall. Stairs were marked with an S and an arrow indicating up or down. Water was a blue zigzag lines or stylized waves. Traps were X marked. Secret passages were dotted lines. Treasure rooms were indicated by a coin symbol or sometimes just the word treasure in all caps, written in the room itself, which made them delightfully easy to aim for and delightfully suspicious when you got there. This grammar was invented by nobody and inherited by everyone. It grew out of wargaming maps, out of architectural drafting conventions, out of the specific economy of trying to communicate a three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional piece of paper to someone who has never seen the place. When home computers moved from text adventures to graphical dungeon crawlers, the map didn't disappear, it just changed form. The overhead view became the default, top down, the act character or a small sprite standing before the player, moved through rooms that were now gone. Right. And then, in the great shift of the mid-1980s, someone decided to add a mini-map in the corner of the screen so you could track where you'd been. The hand-drawn player map became digital. The graph paper became a UI element. Something was lost. Something practical was gained. The argument about which mattered more has never fully been resolved. Monsters. Let's talk about monsters because they're not random. In Colossal Cave Adventure, the main hostile creature was an axe throwing creature. Real axes flying at your head. In a cave system otherwise populated by magic words, crystal bridges, and a bottle of water you could drink. The dwarf was added by Crowther in his original version, which establishes something important. This genre started with a guy who was writing a game for his kids and still put an axe throwing dwarf. Don Woods, the Tolkien fan who expanded it, added more. A dragon, some elves, a troll on a bridge that the player had to deal with before crossing. Woods later said he wanted the fantasy elements to feel like they implied a world, as if the player was a visitor and something had been going on before they arrived. That's the key insight of a good dungeon monster design. The monster isn't challenged you place, it's a resident you're disturbing. In Rogue, monsters were letters, K for kobold, B for bat, L for leprechaun. The most dangerous letter in the dungeon because leprechauns stole your gold and teleported away. You learn the alphabet of the dungeon the hard way. D meant dragon. First time you saw a D, if you didn't know the alphabet yet, you might try to fight it. That mistake usually ended your run permanently. There's a monster in this chamber. Our explorer is going to handle it. The method is his business. The important thing is he knows it's here because this room has the shape of a room where a guardian lives. High ceilings, multiple exits, the remains of something that didn't make it past this point. The room is telling him what it contains to receive. That's good dungeon stuff. The map is honest about what it holds, you know how to read it. There is a concept in dungeon design called the loop. The idea is that a well-designed dungeon has paths that circle back on themselves so that a player who explores correctly can always find their way to a place they've already been. Dead ends exist, rooms at the end of passages with no other exit, but the main structure is a connected loop that the explorer can navigate without getting permanently lost. The earliest text adventures didn't always do this. Colossal Cave had a maze, the famous twisty passages, specifically designed to disorient, but the broader game had enough structure that determined mapping to track. Rogue always had a way out because the rooms were generated on a grid and the hallways were built to connect. You were never truly lost, even if you felt lost. There was always a passage back. The best dungeon designers built in secret loops. Passage that looks like a dead end but connects to the main hall from the other side. A shortcut that only unlocks once you've been somewhere specific. The dungeon rewards the explorer who pays attention. The final corridor is the last such test. Our explorer has been paying attention. Here, every dungeon has a reason. Every map was made to lead somewhere. The treasure isn't always gold. In Colossal Cave, it was 15 objects scattered through 150 rooms, and getting all of them and getting out was the whole point. In Rogue, it was the amulet of Yendor, named Rodney, spelled backwards, hidden on the lowest level of the dungeon, and carrying it back to the surface was harder than descending to get it. The relic, the MacGuffin, the thing the whole map is oriented toward. In the tradition of dungeon map design, the final chamber is the answer to everything that came before. The gate existed to mark the beginning. The junction gave you choices. The armory gave you tools. The bridge required you to cross. The library reminded you that someone had built them. The guardian tested you. All of it pointed here. This is also why dungeon maps work as animation backdrop. The structure is inherently narrative. Every room is a beat. Every passage is a transition. The explorer doesn't just move, they progress. The map is the story. Jules Verne understood this in 1864. Harry Gygax understood it in 1974. Will Crowther understood it in 1975 when he turned a real cave in Kentucky into 700 lines of Fortran because he wanted something to explore with his dog. The dungeon is not a setting, it's a promise. Go in, find something, come back. Our explorer found it. The oldest surviving map in the world, drawn on a clay tablet around 2300 BCE in Mesopotamia, is a map of a city. Streets and buildings and a river. Someone scratched it into clay because they needed to communicate a place to someone who wasn't there. That impulse, a map, a place so others can navigate it, is what's underneath all of this. Graph paper dungeons, the Assy Corridor, 700 lines of Fortran based on a real cave in Kentucky. A hand-drawn map strewn across a desk in a computer lab in 1979. Our explorer has the relic. He knows the map now. Every passage, every junction, every room. This map of this place is a record of everything he survived. That's what maps are. Not directions, evidence. Come back sometime. There are still things we didn't know. Good night.